Hello, good evening. It's a great privilege and honor to be here at the Union to speak on the issue of Tibet. Actually, I just came from India 2 days ago. It's past midnight. So if I doze off while speaking, blame the jet lag, and obviously everybody got to sleep, right? So I'm really grateful to be here, and I want to thank all the organizers for working so hard, and especially to all of you who showed up quite late today. And being a Halloween party, you are like giving up quite a lot, and the Treasury Secretary was here in the evening as well. Now today I'm supposed to speak on the topic, Rise of China, what about Tibet? I thought I'll start with my personal story, and it does connect to China as well as Tibet. Mainly I want to say that if you want to know China, or if you want to understand China, what you read in daily newspapers or what you watch on BBC or business section of any news paper, that's one part of China, one aspect of China. But unless you know the Tibet narrative, unless you know the story of Tibet, you won't fully understand China. We've been saying this for the past 5 decades. Not many people believed us, thinking, oh, Tibet is a peripheral issue. Why should we bother to understand Tibet? Because China is a reality. So as long as you know China, you deal with China, that will be fine. But recently in Hong Kong, I'm sure you have read about the protests in Hong Kong as well as in Taiwan. I was pretty surprised, pleasantly surprised. The new narrative is, what they're saying is, we don't want to be like Tibet. Hence there's a protest in Hong Kong. We don't want to be like Tibet. Hence there are protests in Taiwan as well, in other parts of China as well. Hence, Tibet narrative is very important for you to fully understand and comprehend China. Because Tibet narrative will showcase to you what China is capable of, what Chinese government is capable of. With that, let me start with my personal story. My parents fled Tibet in 1959. Now, before that, my father was a monk in a monastery in Lithang, a place called Lithang in Tibetan. Presently, it's in Sichuan province, but traditionally we call it the province of Kham. There were 3 provinces in Tibet, Kham, Yusang, and Amdo. Now, he was a monk, but his monastery was bombarded and reduced to rubble in 1956. So he had to flee to Lhasa and joined a militia called Shishiganduk. And of all the things, my father was made the quartermaster in charge of arms and ammunition. Can you imagine, you're a monk one day, now next you are in charge of arms and ammunition distributing to all the Tibetan militia. At that time, supported by the United States. So guns and supplies were airdropped. So people used to pick it and then give it to my father and his colleagues. So they used to distribute arms, guns, bullets to all the Tibetan freedom fighters. My mother was 17 years old, and she fled with almost all her family members. From my father's side, all the family members were left behind except for him, who came to India. From my mother's side, all her brothers and sisters managed to flee to India except for her younger brother, who was airdropped back to Tibet and never returned. Now, my mother was 17 years old. Now, after the occupation of Tibet, so she, along with her family members, crossed the Himalayan mountains, the thick forest of Gongpo, presently Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. Unfortunately, my mother slipped and broke her leg. Now her family had to make a very difficult decision. She was 17 years old. Now whether to stay on in the forest and hope that she will recover soon and then make the trip to India or leave her behind. Now finally the collective decision was that she should be left behind because they were running short of supplies. They were in the middle of forest. They had no food, not much left. So they left her behind with her elder sister who was 19 years old and told them that if you survive, we'll see you in India. Now that's invasion and occupation of a nation where people have to flee and sufferings are real. So my father fought against the Chinese army, got wounded, and chief of the Chushiganduk, Andrew Gomputashi, he was also aided by my father. So when we talk about invasion, occupation, and being in exile, it's real. Your families go through this kind of sufferings and experience. And my family and my parents were no exception. Obviously, my parents met in India, and I was born. So I was born in a village between Darjeeling and Kalimpong. So this is UK. Everybody knows about Darjeeling because it's known for tea. When I used to talk about Darjeeling in America, they all nod and say, where is this place? And normally British were quite good in selecting very fine hill towns and call them the Queen of Hills. So during our school days, we always used to write, Darjeeling is the Queen of Hills. Then when I met someone from Simla, Dalhousie, Mussoorie, they also said they were the Queen of Hills. So we used to fight over which is the Queen of Hills. So I'm from one of those Queen of Hills. Actually, I was born in a tea garden near Lapchu. So I had a typical village life. So all my winter vacation, 2 to 3 months, was spent in forest, cutting grass for cows, cleaning cow dungs, helping my mother milk cows, and getting some kicks from not so obedient cows sometimes, and cutting wood for our home. Then obviously you are in a village, so you don't have much of income. So I studied in Tibetan refugee school in Darjeeling. There, obviously, the teachers were very supportive, Tibetan teachers. They're very encouraging, they're very supportive. But the facilities were, when you look at this facility, I think you can't compare. So we didn't have central heating. We used to have rice and dal, lentil soup and rice, every day for dinner for 10 years. How was that? And the lentil soup is watery. And the lunch is dumpling and curry. So not the curry that you get in Indian restaurant, spicy, hot with lots of meat. If you get one piece of meat, you are very lucky. And the dumpling is hard and dark. If you throw it, it bounces higher. So I just went to a library. They were talking about Newton. I think Newton's third law was proven wrong by our dumpling. It bounces higher. And then I've spent winter in school in Darjeeling, minus degrees, without shoes because you are in refugee school. What happens is that when the school gives you pair of shoes, the seniors steal it from you because they want to sell it and get their own pocket money. Then you have to spend winter without shoes, and you study under street light because normally they shut down the dorm light by 8 p.m. or 8:30 p.m. So struggled, worked very hard. Finally, I made my way to Delhi University, and I was very excited from a village to the capital city of India. And obviously, then finally I found the Chinese embassy. Because, in school we are taught how to protest, how to lead demonstration, things like that. So when you actually see a site or venue where there is an embassy, you organize a lot of protest. To the extent that so many times the local police station, the officer knew my name. They used to say, Lobsang aaj bhi aa gaya. Lobsang, you are again here. I say, yes, that's the embassy, So there are protests, arrests, so many times. At one time I did something that I think I should not mention it here, it's recorded. But I landed up in prison for 1 whole week. So I must have done something very, very illegal. Landing in police station is one thing for a couple of hours. That I have done frequently. But landing in the National Prison of India is something I must have done something more drastic than normal, that you can find out. I don't want to be on the record lest I get arrested today. So I've been part of, because at that time when I went to Delhi University, it was 1988. In 87, 88, 89, there was a series of protests, mainly led by monks and nuns in Lhasa, the capital city in and around. So obviously, when you read about their protest and how they were tortured, how they suffer, how they were beaten so badly, many of them suffer for life. You have no option as a Tibetan but go to the streets and protest and make your presence known and make your voices heard. Because what's going on inside Tibet, even today, there is political repression. Meaning, if you organize a protest in Tibet, whether you're 1 or 2 or 3 people, you are bundled up, you are arrested, you go to prison for a long time to come. So there is political repression. There is denial of religious freedom. If you're caught having a photograph of His Holiness Dalai Lama, who came and speak in the same forum before, you will go to jail. And cultural assimilation, Tibetan language is discouraged. At the university level, high school level, even at middle school level, Chinese is the medium of instruction. Now in Tibet University in Lhasa, it's called Tibet University, meant for Tibetan students, but majority of the students in Tibet University in Lhasa are Chinese now. Even Tibetan history is taught in Chinese language. And clearly you can see there's cultural assimilation, because ultimate goal of the Chinese government is to make Tibetans into Chinese, Tibet into China. Hence the Tibet narrative is very important, how they go about doing all these things. Now, so when I was in Delhi University, so frequent protests landed me in trouble so much that my attendance, now you're all undergraduate, my attendance in first year was 45%, second year was improved to 39%, third year was so bad, it was 33%. So the dean told me, you can't sit for exam. I said, why not? Because your attendance, because you're required to have at least 40-some%. So I was an activist, running around, protesting, organizing events. Then I went to the law school in Delhi University. I studied hard. Finally, I got Fulbright scholarship, which gave me an opportunity to go to Harvard Law School. There I did my master's degree. Then, fortunately, I got another scholarship to pursue my doctorate degree, which I completed in 2004. Then I worked there for 7 years. And in 2011, there was an election. There was no incumbent. So there was election. And I was the youngest, least experienced, not known to the Tibetan world. As I always say, your mother loves you the most. Your mother believes you the most. But in that election, even my mother did not believe that I would win. So that was the scenario. But I went in anyways because I believe in participatory democracy. I went and participated, went from settlement to settlement, school to school. Lo and behold, in the first round, I came out on top. Now, before the second round, final round, again, Tibetan democracy is partyless democracy. There is no party system. The philosophy being that if there is a party system, party always fight for their party's interests over national interests. And whoever is in the government, the opposition will do everything to bring that party down, leaving aside the national interests. So hence, ours is partyless democracy. Anybody can run for election, anybody can vote. Once you're elected, you don't have parties, official or parties' interest to support. You support your national interest. That's the basis. Hence, I had a chance because other candidates were former Prime Minister of exile administration, the most seasoned diplomat or the minister, Speaker of the Parliament, Deputy Speaker, and Private Secretary to His Holiness Dalai Lama for more than a decade. I mean, they are regarded very, very high. So I was nobody. I had never worked in Dharamsala, where the Central Tibetan administration is, and 16 years in America. But also the Harvard brand helps a lot, actually, I think so. They got fooled by that. I believe some monks were talking and say, why should we vote for Lobsang Sengye? They would say, look at the factory he's coming from. If the factory is good, product ought to be good. So you all are from Oxford. When you go back to your own countries and society, I think you can bet on that. But once you are elected, you're on your own. Huh? So leadership is a lonely place, it's a difficult place. So what happened was, after I was elected the first round, before the final round, I think 10 days before the final round, His Holiness the Dalai Lama decided to do something which normally leaders don't do: give up political authority. Yeah, you can see in Syria, Assad is still refusing to give up political authority, and the whole of the country is in mess, and so on and so forth. Normally, once you're in power, and I think, absolute power corrupts everybody, so you don't give up power. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama decided to separate the church and the state, devolve all his political authority. And he said, I will remain the most revered spiritual leader, and whoever is elected will take over the political and administrative responsibilities. How is that for your job description? And you are novice, you have no experience whatsoever, now you're expected to fill in the shoes of the Dalai Lama. That's an easy task, right? So, and I had 10 days to decide whether I should carry on or withdraw. Because one advantage of serving as Sikyong, or the political head under Dalai Lama, is that he is the most revered person in the Tibetan world. 99.9% of Tibetan people have complete faith in him. So whatever you decide, if you get a signature, you are protected. You make a decision, get a signature, show it to Tibetans, say, even if it's wrong, don't dare criticize, because if you criticize, you might go to hell. Chances are high, right? Now I thought that's an easy job. So I ran for the election. First round I won. I said, okay, His Holiness Dalai Lama is with me. 10 days before the second round, he said, you're on your own. Now I had to make a decision. I said, oh my goodness, now I have to take on China, the rising power. Now I have to convince UK, America, and rest of the world to support us and persuade the Chinese government to enter into dialogue with us to resolve the issue of Tibet and the sufferings of Tibetan people. As you have read, 144 Tibetans have burned themselves, committed self-immolation from 2011 to 2016. The sufferings are real, pains are real. They are giving up their lives. When someone pinches you, you don't tolerate. But when you put kerosene or petrol over your body and burn yourself, that's the highest form of sacrifice. That also shows the desperation of Tibetans. That also shows the determination of Tibetans. So Central Tibet administration, we have discouraged self-immolation from the very beginning, consistently and categorically. Having said that, we do support their aspirations, because their aspirations are return of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom for Tibetans. That aspiration ought to be supported by everybody. So the sufferings are real inside Tibet. Now, when you are 10 days ahead of the final round, you have to think of sufferings in Tibet, how to elevate their sufferings. And you look at rising China, and you look at rest of the world with the economy growth in China. Many leaders are persuaded by money than morals. And how can you do something in Dharamsala from an exile setup to convince the world, to convince Chinese leadership to change the situation in Tibet? That's very daunting. Now, if you analyze too much as an academic, you reach paralysis through analysis. So I stopped analyzing. I said, what the heck? I'll take the job and leave it to my karma. So being Buddhist, it helps. As a Buddhist, you believe in the world of impermanence. Everything is impermanent. Everything will end anyways. So if you believe in your karma, if the collective karma is good, there will be result. If the collective karma is not good, the result won't be positive. And all I can do is commit myself, dedicate myself for the cause. Because the notion of impermanence is very simple. Maybe it might be helpful to you also. You are born, you die. No one can escape death. So while you live, what do you do is the question. Make money? Live a luxurious life? Or commit yourself for a cause? That's the choice you have. So you are born, you die, and what you do in between determines your life and your legacy. So I thought to myself, instead of having 10 buildings, I would rather die fighting for a cause. Because at the end of my life, when I look back, I say, you know what? I tried my best. I gave my best shot. It worked, it did not work, it's secondary. But giving your best shot is the primary reason why we are in this life. So that's why I decided to commit myself. And I don't know, at that time I didn't know how difficult it will be. And it is a difficult job. And leadership is a very lonely place. You have a lot of advisors, you have interest-driven opinion and advices that comes along. Ultimately, you have to make the call. Once you make the call, you have to live with it. In that sense, it's a very lonely place. So I served for 5 years, and just recently I got re-elected for second term and the final term. So that means I must have done something good. Otherwise, Tibetans won't vote for me. So here I am in my second term. So I think union is so prestigious that they thought, till I get re-elected, I won't get opportunity to be in this forum. So I'm very grateful. Now, as far as Tibetan democracy is concerned, it's been going on for 50 years. We take it very seriously. Tibetans from Alaska to Australia participate. Tibetans in Ladakh, and on March 20th, if they are living in 5,000 meters high mountain tops, they come out from the tents and vote in minus 20 degrees. And then Tibetans in Bandra district, that's the warmest or the hottest Tibetan settlement, it's 40 degrees Celsius. Still they come out and vote. And we take election very seriously. And the participation in election from 2001 to 2006 to 11 to 16 has doubled. So that means there are more Tibetans who are engaging in Tibetan democracy, more Tibetans who are embracing the Tibetan freedom struggle. So the younger generation, second, third generation, are still actively involved in the Tibetan freedom struggle because this is a just cause. We cannot give up. If we give up, the Tibetans in Tibet will suffer. Now, why Tibet matters for the rest of the world? I'll give you a couple of reasons. Civilizationally, spiritually, is one of the ancient civilization, 2,000 plus years old history. From Buddhist point of view, the best preserved text in Buddhism is not in the place where Buddha was born, that's Nepal. It's not in the place Buddha gave first teachings. That's India. It's not in China, not in Korea, but in Tibet. Why in 7th and 8th century, and from 7th century on, Tibetan Losavas, translators, they trekked from Tibet through Nepal to India to Nalanda University, learned Sanskrit, learned Buddhism, translated those Buddhist texts, and took it back to Tibet. During those days. Now the best preserved teachings of Buddha is in Tibet. Now what happened after the invasion of Tibet and occupation of Tibet? According to some experts, Tibet has 6 million population, but they had 3 million texts. So from literacy point of view, it's one of the highest number of books as per the population ratio. But by 1959, as I told you, by 1956, the Chinese army started destroying our monasteries. By 1962, 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99.99% of monks and nuns were disrobed. They were sent to jail. They were tortured. So you can clearly see what China was trying to do, or the Communist Party of China was trying to do. They thought if we destroy Tibetan civilization, Tibetan spirituality, that the foundation of Tibetan identity will be destroyed, and they can become Chinese. So Tibetans were made to wear Mao suits, speak in Chinese. But now, after 50 years, what you see in Tibet, as I said, in exile, Tibetan participation in democracy is very strong. Even in Tibet, second and third generation are actively participating in preservation and revival of Tibetan identity. Major monasteries that were destroyed by Chinese army in Tibet are rebuilt already in exile. Now thereby also in Tibet. So in that sense, the resistance is very strong in Tibet today as well. So civilizationally, culturally and spiritually is one of the ancient civilizations. It ought to be protected. It ought to be preserved. Because, I've been to several museums, and you learn a lot when you go to museums. But also there's this dread in my mind. I always tell myself, yes, I learned a lot going to a museum, but we don't want to be a museum piece. I always tell younger generation Tibetans, you go to museum, when you see the walls, when you see the tankas, when you see statues, you have to remind yourself, we are not going to be a museum piece where a curator or expert will take kids to museum and say, that was Tibet once, that was Tibetan civilization, culture, now it's history. We don't want to be that. And for the richness of the humanity and the universe, ancient civilization of Tibet ought to be protected. Now I'll come to another reason. Tibet is vital as far as environment is concerned for many countries in Asia. Number one, Tibet is the source of fresh water for downstream countries. Now I can see some students from South Asia. Indus River originates in Tibet, flows to Ladakh and Kashmir, and flows to Pakistan. Satluj River from Tibet to India to Pakistan. Brahmaputra River, which is the lifeline of Bangladesh, starts from Tibet through Assam to Bangladesh. Mekong River, we all know about the Vietnam War and Mekong Delta. Mekong River originates in Tibet and flows through ASEAN countries. The Salween River, Irrawaddy River, so all the way to Thailand and Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, they all drink Tibetan water. And we've been very generous. Nowadays you have to buy water. For centuries we have been sharing with them for free, based on Buddhist notion of impermanence and environment sustainability. Now in China, Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, starts from Tibet and flows through China. Yangtze River also. Now experts have said that Tibet is the source of fresh water, which provide fresh water for more than 1 billion people in these countries. So Tibet is rich as far as water is concerned. Now China has 19% of the world population, but only 11 or 12% of fresh water. So which means 400 to 500 million Chinese are facing scarcity of fresh water as we speak today. Situation in Bangladesh is worse, India is worse, Pakistan is worse, and Tibet is the source of fresh water. Now experts have also said that before wars were fought over land, nowadays wars are fought over energy, soon wars will be fought over water, and Tibet is the source of fresh water. Not just that, because of Chinese population migration to Tibet, because of urbanization of Tibetan areas, because of hydropower being built in Tibet, because of globalization as well and climate change, global warming, 50% of Tibetan glaciers have melted and disappeared, according to NASA. By 2080, another 50% of present glaciers will be melted and disappear. Hence, urbanization of Tibet, the Chinese migration to Tibetan areas, more buildings, more infrastructure, is a threat to the glaciers of Tibet. Faster they melt, faster the lack of fresh water for all these countries. Hence, it's a big problem. So hence, from environmental point of view also, we have to preserve and protect Tibetan plateau. I'm sure you have read the heat wave in Europe, heat wave in northeast of China. It's directly related to the jet stream over Tibet. More it heats up, faster the glaciers melt. So that's why Tibet is vital for for ASEAN countries, South Asian countries, and East Asia as well, in that sense. Hence, why we should care about Tibet. It's in the interest of all these Asian countries that Tibetan plateau has to be restored to its original stewardship led by the Tibetan people. So, and there are other reasons as well. From human rights point of view, I'm sure you have read, I've written an opinion piece in Guardian, which has more details, which got published today online. Larungar Monastery. Now, as I told you, 98% of monasteries and nunneries are destroyed. Now, Tibetans have rebuilt some of the major monasteries back in Tibet. Now, one example is Larungar. Now, this is actually is an isolated place. One famous scholar, Khenpo Jigme Phunzo, this is the place where he meditated. But followers from all over Tibet came and built huts and shacks to be near the teacher. So it grew and grew, and it's estimated that there were, at least around 2001-2, 20,000 or so monks and nuns from all over Tibet, and thousands of Chinese as well. Now, what did the Chinese government do? They destroyed part of Larungar. Even today, as we speak, destruction is going on. Now, they want to reduce the Larungar monastery to 6,000 monks and nuns. You type in Larungar on Google, you will see YouTube of monks and nuns crying because their friends are chased away from the monastery as we speak. Now, no one built this monastery. People themselves came, built their huts and shacks. Now, Chinese government is destroying. Now, that kind of repression is going on. And also, there is a grid system where nomads and farmers are all issued the ID card with second generation biometric chips. So you swipe it, they know your biodata, they know where you came, where you went, because they want to have effective systematic control over you. So this is also what's going on inside Tibet. Hence, challenges are many inside Tibet. Having said all this, as per the vision of His Holiness Dalai Lama, the solution we propose to the Chinese government is very simple and reasonable. That's what we want is genuine autonomy as per the Chinese laws within China. So we are not seeking separation from China or independence from China. What we are saying is the present repression ought to end. The torture of political prisoners ought to end, and Tibetans ought to have genuine autonomy as per the Chinese laws. Chinese constitution provides genuine autonomy for Tibetan people. Minority Nationality Act of 1984 provides that Tibetan ought to use their own language, Tibetan ought to preserve their culture. All these are provided in Chinese laws. So what we are saying is if Chinese government implement these laws, we will take that as genuine autonomy. But yet, it's not happening. So what's written in Chinese laws are not implemented to the Tibetan people, hence the protest, hence the burning, hence even the nomads and farmers are out in the streets. And you can clearly see young and old, nomads and farmers, monks and nuns, teachers and students are all out in the streets of Tibet protesting against this repression. And it's going on even after 50 plus years. So this is the resistance that's going on. And what we believe and what we subscribe to, the path we follow is nonviolence. Now, among the 144 Tibetans who burned themselves, and of which 120 or so killed or died, not even a single self-immolator harmed or hurt Chinese person or Chinese property. Even at that level of resistance, you are not harming a Chinese person or a property. You are still leading in nonviolent protest. Of course, burning oneself is a violent death. But when you don't harm others, it's not violence. So even at that level of resistance, you can clearly see the Tibetans are following nonviolence as a path. Hence, we are nonviolent, we are reasonable. What we seek is what's written in Chinese laws. And what we do is simply preserve our identity and pursue our dignity. This is denied by the Chinese government so far. And I hope reason and wisdom will prevail, and hope the Chinese government will be persuaded by the government of the United Kingdom that they come to the negotiating table and resolve the issue of Tibet peacefully. I do believe that this will happen because, arc of history has to bend towards justice, and it will bend towards justice to Tibetan people as well. So that's why, I left America. I went to India because I want to be nearer Tibet when that day happens. And I do believe that nonviolence will prevail. And when that day happens, it will be one of the best stories of the 21st century. We will write in the history books saying nonviolence and ahimsa prevail once again. Justice prevail once again. So that day will happen, and we all have to make it happen. So that's why today, even though it's past midnight in India, past my bedtime, I'm here in this prestigious forum trying to persuade all of you to hear what we have to say and understand the Tibetan narrative so you understand China better. So this is my fourth talk in one day. So I'm working hard so that you all will be persuaded and you all do something for justice and human rights around the world and environmental rights around the world. And if you're interested, for the cause of Tibet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You opened and closed your talk with a reference to how you live in India, that you'd come here from India, that we're past your bedtime because you're used to being in India. And I'm wondering for how much longer you think Tibetan governance and culture can endure whilst in exile?
Tibetan civilization is an ancient civilization, so I think we'll be there as long as it takes. Till basic freedom is restored in Tibet. I sincerely believe that, and the second and third generation of Tibetans inside and outside also believe that. Now, I did share with you that I got elected by Tibetans in exile. That's the direct voting by Tibetans in exile. But actually, I do have support from inside Tibet as well, indirectly, because I received a lot of messages from monasteries and nunneries where they're praying for my safety, for my health, and a lot of singers have composed songs and uploaded in YouTube. Thereafter, they go to prison because they get arrested, they go to prison, they're suffering. Now, they are not doing this because I'm Lobsang Sangye, the person, but the symbol that I represent the symbol of resistance, right? So that's why they are supporting me. So hence, the solidarity of Tibetans inside and outside are very strong. A sense of pride in our identity is also very strong. So I don't think the Chinese government, no matter how much they try, they will not be able to assimilate Tibetans into Chinese. By the way, Tibet is mountainous and very high. It's very cold. So during summer, thousands of Chinese come to Tibetan areas. But at this time, it's winter. Thousands have left Tibet. In winter, Tibet is still Tibetan majority. So because Tibet is so high and so cold, I think it needs genetic adaptation for Chinese for centuries to be able to live in Tibet. So, and also we are not a big fan of algo and inconvenient truth. We want global warming to not come that fast. Because also if you go by anthropology, I think it's 3,000, 4,000 years only that Tibetans moved up to 4,000 meters high. Before, they used to live around 3,000 meters high because wheat can grow in 3,000 meters high. But wheat cannot survive winter and cold. So then we discovered barley, from which we make tsampa, pa and all that. So then barley can grow in 4,000 meters high. So Tibetans have also moved up to 4,000 meters high 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So for Chinese, they are from lowland area, so it will take many centuries to completely swamp Tibet. In that sense, we'll be there Tibet will be there, and we will be there for a long time.
Okay. Now, the Dalai Lama's retirement as political leader of the Tibetan government in exile in 2011 has meant that, uniquely, for the last 5 years, the political leader of Tibet has not been its religious leader. How do you find that transition of power?
As I told you, I did not do analysis because I'll reach paralysis. I just went day by day, and I said, I'll leave it to my karma and work hard. So that's all you can do. So obviously this job is a very difficult job, very challenging job. Once you're in exile, the existential question is, when I'm asked, who are you? It's very difficult to answer. I am a Tibetan whose parents fled Tibet, and I was born in India, spent 16 years in America, now in Oxford Union, right? So you never get an easy answer. And what is the situation in Tibet? Again, you have to explain in a long way. Whenever you explain about your parents, there's a long story behind. So it's not that easy, and especially when you hear 144 Tibetans burning themselves, and all the names come to my office, I'll be the first and the last one to know. So when you hear the stories, personal stories, mother of 3 children burning and dying, father, learned monk, and you see just lives lost for a cause, it's very painful. It's you can sense the emotion and the sufferings of the family members, and on that you have to endure on a daily basis. And then when you see the YouTube, just this morning, Larungar monastery getting destroyed, and monks and nuns chasing after trucks and buses where bus load of monks are packed, bundled and sent off, and their friends are running after buses and trucks, crying, and you can clearly see their cry or plea, saying, can you do something? Is the world listening? Is the world hearing our suffering and our cries and pains? And then my duty is to come and magnify their voices and speak for them. And unfortunately, the world news is dominated by IS and extremism and violence and beheading and all that. You don't get traction, even in news media, even though it's a just cause, even there is a non-violent cause, it's innocent people who are suffering. So this is what you're decked against. But nonetheless, you keep pursuing, you keep fighting for your cause. So it's difficult, but got to do it.
And on the point of that lack of coverage and indeed that pain and suffering, do you think there's a sort of selective empathy in the West whereby students and other activists will get behind certain causes, but they'll be completely ignorant or uninterested in other causes? And do you think Tibetans are a victim of that?
Yes and no, actually. If you compare to 1980s, Tibetans, again, we are Buddhists, so we always look at glass half full. We always believe that every human being has Buddha nature, which means human beings are inherently good, including Chinese leaders like Xi Jinping. So hopefully the good sense will prevail and solve the issue of Tibet. So if you compare to 1970s and 80s, when Tibet was a dead issue in many sense, now there is more coverage, there is more awareness, and there is more support at the people's level. So our strength has always been awareness at the people's level and support at the people's level. So when government does something or the other, when they don't want to see me, when they don't want to see me in their foreign office or prime minister's office, we don't complain. We always say that's their choice. And we always say we have no complaints because we don't want to cause inconvenience to them. But we also want to remind the British government or European governments or any other government to read their constitution properly and understand their democratic values and commitment to human rights, which they say all the time. But when we say, what about our democracy, Tibetan democracy, what about our human rights, they say, what? There's China, investment is more important, renminbi is more important, hence then obviously there is that frustration. So at the government level, yes, limitation, selective support or token gestures, but at people's level, awareness and support has been there, and we have to keep at it.
Great. My final question before we pass it on to the audience for the final 15 is there a sense of solidarity between different dissident groups in China, between Falun Gong, between Uyghurs, between Tibetans, despite the cultural and ethnic difficulties? Is there a sense of unification between these different persecuted groups?
Oh yes, there's a strong sense of solidarity. Because I've been to a couple of forums where a Uyghur speaker, Inner Mongolian speaker, and Chinese dissidents, mainly Uyghur and Mongolians, Tibetans speak. You just have to close your eyes and listen to them. The narrative is almost exactly the same. 1949, PRC was founded. In December, Mao Zedong gave the famous speech. Invasion happened, occupation happened, destruction happened, killings happened. And in Xinjiang, Uyghurs, the Muslims, they can't observe Ramadan. Can you imagine? They're not allowed to keep beard. They're not allowed to wear hat. You are not allowed to do fasting if you are Communist Party members. You are forced to eat. That's Ramadan, So even in Inner Mongolia, I'm sure you read in news that the Mongolian nomads are out there protesting against mining because Chinese companies are coming and mining their sacred mountains and taking, all kinds of natural resources, especially rare earth. 90%, I read somewhere, 80+% of rare earth is in China. Of the 80%, 90% are in Inner Mongolia. So Inner Mongolia is rich in natural resources. Tibet is rich in natural resources. So when America supported Kuwait against Saddam Hussein's invasion during those days, and the reason was Kuwait has oil. We also said, Tibetans, we also have oil. Xinjiang has more oil. What about our support to us? So that way, yes, there are some selective support. But our sense of solidarity with Uyghurs and Mongolians are very much there, including with Chinese dissidents, because democracy is universal and democracy is inevitable. So, from cultural relativism, Asian values arguments are made. But if you look at it, democracy has to come in China as well. In fact, that's the last frontier where democracy has to prevail. Because around the world, Christianity and democracy, Judaism and democracy, Hinduism and democracy has all prevailed, even Islam and democracy with the Arab Spring and what you see in Indonesia, different Tunisia, you can clearly see a democracy is compatible with any values, any religion. So Confucianism and China is the last frontier, and I think it will happen.
Great, thanks. And let's take some audience questions before we finish. If we can go to the eager hand on the back row over there. Please stand up and talk into the microphone.
Thank you for being here today. So the Dalai Lama is apparently very important for the Tibetan people in Tibet, in India, and all over the world. But in the unfortunate event that if you were to pass away, according to the tradition, the new Dalai Lama would be selected within Tibet, and as a result, the Tibetan government in exile would not have influence on the new Dalai Lama. And what if that were to happen? What does that mean to the Tibetan government in exile, and what do you think the future for Tibet will be after that point? Thank you.
That's the Chinese government's narrative. There's definitive in the assertion that Dalai Lama has to be born in Tibet, recognized by the Chinese government as per the tradition. As per the tradition, Dalai Lama will decide where and when to be born, right? Because it's Dalai Lama's reincarnation. It's not Communist Party's reincarnation. So he has to decide. So he will decide, as per the reincarnation idea itself, he will decide to be born in exile. Because why? The idea of reincarnation is you want to come back to complete the mission and the vision of the previous Dalai Lama. If he dies in exile without fulfilling the mission, he has to be reborn in exile to continue the mission and the vision. Now, the theory is that the Chinese government will select their own Dalai Lama. Hence, they are preparing for that eventuality. But it will be like Fidel Castro selecting the Pope and expecting all the Catholics around the world to believe, oh yeah, that's the Pope because Fidel Castro selected him. So Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, all they have done is destroyed 98% of the monasteries and nunneries. 99.99% of the monks and nuns were disrobed, sent to jail. That's the track record. As we speak, they are destroying a major monastery called Larungar in Tibet. Nuns and monks are chased away. That's the track record. Now, if that same government selects the next Dalai Lama, who will believe and follow that Dalai Lama? So, Tibetans will decide the next Dalai Lama, and he will be born in exile. That's for sure. And religion is a matter of faith and heart. It's not something money can buy. I'm sure Chinese government can buy a lot of things, including nuclear reactor investment in UK and all that. That's all you can buy. But faith is with your heart. And that you cannot buy. So when the next Dalai Lama comes, he has to be accepted by Tibetans. And that will be credible and legitimate. So he will be born in exile, and he will be there for years to come.
Thanks. Another question, please. You go in the second row there. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your fascinating speech. I have a question. Why do you think China chose to be such a source of compassion for Tibet, despite its legal constitutional commitments?
I think the term in Chinese, Xizang, means Western treasure. So if you go by the territory, Tibet is as big as Western Europe or California and Texas combined. It's 2.5 million square kilometers of land. Now China has 1.3 billion population, so it needs land for people to make a living. So it's a huge tract of land. And lots of mineral resources, not just water. Gold, borax, uranium, petrol, you just name it. 123 different kinds of minerals to be exploited in Tibet. And also Tibet has pristine forest, more on the south west of the Tibetan area. So Tibet is rich in natural resources and landmass as well. And also the larger issue is the term Tungo means Middle Kingdom. So China is the middle of the universe, rest are barbarians. So Tibetans were barbarians, they ought to be civilized. They have a very colonial kind of argument that we are the master, we are the civilized ones, so we ought to be liberated and civilized. So Tibetans were, quote unquote, at the moment, peacefully liberated with tanks and guns, peacefully liberated. Now we are being civilized because we are dark, we are, feudal and slave system. So that's the argument they are making. But that is not true.
Thank you. Let's take another question, please. Let's go to the card in the corner over there.
Tibet has a long historic relationship with India, and recently in 2014 we elected a very different government from previous ones, one which has a more aggressive mindset towards China from a nationalistic perspective, and one which simultaneously promotes economic advancement with China.
Can you hold the mic more closely so we can hear you? Yeah.
So I would just like to know if you think that the recent government elected in India has affected India's stance on Tibet in the international sphere, in the UN and such organizations.
Even the present Modi government.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, not overtly, but it doesn't matter which political party came to power in India, whether it's Congress or Janata Dal or BJP, their stand on Tibet has been similar, mainly humanitarian in nature. India has done most for the Tibetan people by far, because the His Holiness Dalai Lama is in India, Central Tibetan Administration which I run is in India, the largest number of population is in India, all our monasteries, nunneries are in India. So no government has done more to Tibetans than India. Now, politically, none of the political parties have said explicitly on the issue of Tibet. Having said that, when the Prime Minister Modi got elected and in his swearing-in ceremony, I was invited as one of the guests, which became a news. I was told the Chinese government and officials were quite angry because I was in the front row. The Chinese ambassador was in the second row along with all the ambassadors. So as per protocol, they found it unacceptable. Recently, before, whenever there was a bilateral agreements between India and China, one China was accepted and was written in the bilateral agreements. Nowadays, India conditioned that if China wants one China, that China has to agree for one India as well. So China does not agree with one India, so hence India also does not subscribe to one China. And recently there was a news that His Holiness the Dalai Lama might visit Arunachal Pradesh, and Chinese government objected, and the Indian Foreign Ministry said the Dalai Lama is an honored guest of India, he can visit anywhere in India. So in that sense, yes, India's stand generally have been a little more assertive than before. Yeah. Partly because India has applied for membership in the NSG, Nuclear Supply Group, the United Nations Security Council, and then the main opposition has been China, as you know. But the Chinese got the membership in the UN Security Council because India was offered that seat. But Nehru generously said, instead of Taiwan, China should have it. Now India is applying for membership in the UN Security Council, and China is opposing it. Yeah.
Next, we have time for one more question. If we go to the girl on the end of the row over there in the white shirt. Yep. The mic is behind you.
Hello, thank you so much for an incredibly genuine and inspiring talk. I wanted to know, what do you think, honestly, it would take for China to give Tibet its freedom? And if you'll permit me, if today China decided to do that, what are the first few things that you would like Tibet, that you would like to do in Tibet, and where you want to take it?
Have our own basic human rights, preserve our own identity, our culture, our language. This is a rich civilization which ought to be protected. Now, how should Chinese leaders or Chinese people view the Tibet issue? Historically speaking, it's not like this is the first time the Chinese army has come to Tibet. Chinese army have come to Tibet before. In fact, in 7th and 8th centuries, Tibetan army has also invaded and occupied the capital city of China. So we have gone back and forth. So sometimes when I say we don't fear China, people get puzzled as to why everybody fears China. I said, yeah, we have dealt with them historically for thousands of years. We know them pretty well. At the moment, they are dominating us and they are, kind of repressing us. But we have seen them before, and we will be there for a long time to come. So we can't avoid each other, we are next to each other. But historically speaking, you look at the Tang dynasty, or the Sung, or the Ming, or the Qing, or the Yuan dynasty. You can pick any dynasty, Chinese dynasty. Now the Yuan is a Mongolian, the Qing is a Manchu. You can pick any. And we can have that relationship, you see. So the present situation is an aberration, even in the context of China-Tibet relationship as far as history is concerned. So we have invaded them, they've invaded us. Somehow we have always found an arrangement whereby we have coexisted peacefully. So we can pick any moment in the past 1,000 years history and can live side by side. There need not be any animosity or repression and resentment. Now, one clear example is Chokhang Temple. Chokhang is the holiest shrine in the Tibetan Buddhist world. It's like, Mecca for Muslim or Vatican for Catholics. Chokhang is the holiest shrine. Now, oddly, in the Chokhang Temple, the statue of Buddha was brought by Chinese Princess Wang Chen. So can you imagine in the holiest shrine, the most sacred statue is a statue, if not made in China, it was brought from China. So Tibetans' reverence for the statue, even though it's from China, is the highest. And the respect for the Chinese Princess Wangchen, who is on the top floor, is equally great. Now, for centuries, Tibetans, even today if you go to Chokhang Temple, you see them, Tibetans, prostrating flat, right? Circumambulating around Chokhang Temple, even today. So Chokhang in some way is a symbol of what could be our relationship. That means a sacred temple, sacred statue where Tibetans went and pay respect. Now Chokhang Temple is turned into almost a police station or prison. There are surveillance cameras looking down on pilgrims. There are sharpshooters and gun, on rooftops. Who made this Chokhang Temple into that? After the occupation of Tibet, invasion of Tibet, now Chokhang, instead of being the holiest shrine, which is where Tibetans freely went and pay respect, it's turned into a prison. That happened after the occupation. So even from that point of view, the Chinese government should realize that they have made a mistake. Because if Tibetans had inherent animosity towards Chinese people, then they should not be going to the statue from China and this Chinese woman who is on the first floor. They're still going there. All they want to do is continue the tradition, but it's being prevented by the present Chinese government. So even from historical point of view, even from a spiritual point of view, the present relationship is a mistake. Now finally, I'm sure there are a lot of Chinese students in this audience. One thing the Chinese people ought to understand when they talk about Tibet is that there is Tibetan narrative and there is Tibetan mindset. Because I have a lot of Chinese friends who say, I've been to Tibet, I spent 2 weeks there, and no Tibetans complained to me. So what you are saying is not true. And I said, obviously you are Han Chinese, you are the master class. How can Tibetans complain to you? Because you are also the policemen, the secret intelligence people who torture you in prison, right? You are that class. So how can you expect Tibetans to come and say, hey, we are not happy? Now, if you ask by Chinese to a Tibetan, one question in Tibetan, same question in English, and in Chinese you get different answers. If a Chinese asks a Tibetan in Tibet, Nishi Tungo Rema, are you Chinese? The Tibetan will say, how? Yes. Hence Chinese say, yeah, I asked him, are you Chinese? And Tibetan say, yes, how? I'm Chinese. So he is Chinese, she is Chinese. So why are you exiled Tibetans, Lobsang Sengye, you are complaining? But the problem is, if you ask in English to a Tibetan in Tibet, are you Chinese? They will say, yes, but I'm a Tibetan. You see? I say I'm of Tibetan origin. See the answer, same question, different. Now if you ask in Tibetan, can I gemi yimbe? Same question, are you Chinese? Tibetan will say, me, no, nga phebai. I am a Tibetan. Because why? There is no term in Tibetan language which combines Tibetan and Chinese as one people. China and Tibet as one country. So hence Tibetan mindset is deeply rooted in our own civilization, in our own identity, in our own spirituality. Hence we think differently. But Chinese don't understand this because they say, oh, I went there for 2 weeks and I didn't see any problem. Then I always ask, how did you get there? Did you stay in Tibetan hotels? No, I was told, it's quite dangerous. So you stayed in Chinese hotel, you ate in Chinese restaurant, you were shown around by Chinese tour guide, then you didn't see anything except for altitude sickness, right? Now, if you think Tibetans are your brothers and sisters, you should be shown around by a Tibetan tour guide. Doesn't matter which dark alleys he takes you. You should stay in Tibetan hotel, even though you might, first night you might have sleepless night, but second night it will be over, you'll get good sleep. And you should try Tibetan food, That's the beauty of being tourist, adventurous. Now you go to Tibetan Chinese hotel, Chinese restaurant, and then Chinese tour guide, and then you don't say much. So that's the problem. And also I spent 16 years, I told you, in the US. The one thing that I enjoyed doing was meeting Chinese students and scholars from China. I have debated with them for long, long hours. So I have never got around trying to explain to them, to make them understand about Tibet. Because after some time, their narrative is polar opposite to mine. We start banging tables, start shouting, all our colleagues run away. Whenever Chinese and Tibetan meet, that's the scenario. So then I started thinking. So I asked them, how do you know about situation in Tibet? They say, obviously from Chinese media, CCTV, Xinhua, People's Daily. And I said, normally, how much of the news in Chinese media do you trust? Or on Chinese people in China proper, they say 50-50. 50% is true, 50% not true. And I said, okay, then please tell me which 50% of Tibet issue is not true. Let's start from there. Oh, on Tibet, I thought it's 100% true. Now, how can it be the same media is 100% true on Tibet and Tibetan people, whereas 50% true on general China? So you have to start from there. So I know many of my Chinese friends, they start from Xinhua News Agency, which they don't understand is 50%, in which they normally agree is 50% not true, but they accept it's 100% true on the Tibet issue. So hence, there are two narratives. And you have to understand both the narrative. If you understand both the narrative, you will be a better Chinese, will be a better Tibetan, and China will be better, Chinese leaders will be better. Because to resolve the issue of Tibet, it's in the interest of the Chinese government also. Because we will keep speaking. And I know the Oxford Forum is very prestigious. Any prestigious forum that I get, I'll speak, Even if I'm asked to come to any small forum, it need not be prestigious. Tibetans will keep speaking. We have been speaking for decades. We will keep speaking for decades, if centuries, if needed. Because our story is our right. And Chinese government cannot dominate and prevail unjustly. Hence, we will fight this cause because this is a just cause. And our demand and our aspirations are also reasonable. What we are saying is, China, you can have your sovereignty, territorial integrity. Just give us genuine autonomy, where has space to live, and where we can have our own identity and culture, which is very reasonable. And I do believe sooner or later, Chinese leaders will come to sense, wisdom and courage will prevail, and we'll find a solution for the issue of Tibet. If not, we will keep persisting, and China will change, democracy will prevail. Either way, we will prevail. So when that day comes, as we meet here, past midnight, my time, we all will meet again in Lhasa, the capital city, and we will have Potala Palace right in front of us, and Dalai Lama will be in his original room, will be looking down, even after midnight. So we all will be dancing in front of Potala Palace after drinking not wine, Tibetan barley chang, which is equally strong. So I know when we do the round dance, Gorshe, Tibetan dance, I can clearly see some of your steps going wrong way, but we'll accept that because that will be a day of celebration. So it will come sooner than later. So get ready for party. Thank you.